Hi everyone, thanks for being with me. I thought I would take a dive into an area which is fraught with all sorts of danger and just see how it turns out. So, I've been reading something around gender affirming care and wondering how relevant is this to us today and whether we're getting our knickers in a knot over something that is relatively unnecessary. But the people that are expressing their concerns around gender affirming care are people who usually sit on the right of politics, so hence I am often sceptical of their views. I'm not suggesting for a moment that they're wrong, but I think skepticism is a fair analysis. So I was looking up a woman by the name of Dr. Gillian Spencer, who has been dismissed from or is reprimanded by, I can't work out which one of these it is, she's a child psychologist who's working with Westmead Hospital, and she had some counter views around the work they were doing in the hospital with children and gender dysphoria. And so I thought I'd look her up and have a conversation with you about where you think gender dysphoria sits, or whether gender affirming care is appropriate. Now, I just want to go through, before I show you some articles, my reflection on this. And basically it is this, that kids go through certain stages as they're growing up, where they're questioning who they are in many, many ways. How do I fit into society? How do I fit into this world? They look to their peers and others to define, in some cases, who they are, how masculine or feminine they are. Now, that is just a natural progression and a natural stage that people take. But then there's this other group of other children who clearly feel uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable, with the gender that they've been assigned. And, are we to discount that group of people? Are we to say that those kids do not exist, or that the issues that they're confronting and the conflict that creates for them is also they're imagining that? Is it unreal? Is it just a stage that they're going through? How do we define that? And it appears to me that there are many people in this argument who wish to define it simply as a child going through a stage, and that they will grow out of that stage. Now, I think there is some research that says that some of those kids do go through that stage and they grow out of it. And then there's another group of kids where it is extremely distressing to consider themselves trapped in a body in which they don't want to live. And to the point whereby some of those kids eventually choose to suicide because they can't stand that any longer. So they're a real cohort of people, and we need to consider what it is that is happening for them that needs to be cared for, that needs to be affirmed about them. So that's kind of where I sit at this particular point in time. Now, what sort of treatment we should provide is open for debate, because do we have hormone blockers and other things that we need to do? There is an argument, I think, that when a child reaches adulthood, in other words, no longer a child, then they're entitled to alter their bodies in whichever way they choose to. So that is a non-issue, because that sits in adulthood, and that is a choice that an adult might make, and fair enough. So where do we sit in relation to this? Well, the right wing have decided to reflect on this because they, for whatever reason, see it as an affront to them that someone would choose a gender that they're not born with. And a lot of that, the root of that, I guess, comes from the genesis, if you like, comes from biblical references and whatever, and so a lot of them tend to be these religious freaks. But does it have any real ground? Well, probably not. But it is an argument that they're putting forward because they feel uncomfortable with the idea that children may choose to be something that they're not assigned to at birth. And so what do they do with that? For a lot of the people on the right wing, this is a confusing notion, that they don't understand, I think, a lot of the time, that people can make choices that are different to the types of choices that they would make. That people do have different ideas and different versions of the world than what they do. I mean, a simple example of that is climate change. We know climate change is here. We see it. It's happening for us right at this very moment around the rest of the world. But there'll still be people that will deny that it's happening. There'll be people that will deny that, the need for, sun and weather type energy as opposed to, fossil fuels and other things. So there are people that will deny almost anything, that even though the evidence is sitting right in front of you and you say, well, this is happening, but I'm not going to do anything about it because I don't typically want to believe it. So there's the same thing happening in relation to kids. I think it may be. And that we need to start to become aware that this group down. We need to highlight the fact that this is an extremely small percentage of our community. This is such a small percentage. We wonder why it has been blown out to be whatever it is, but it is the fear factor. So it is a whole lot of adults afraid that for whatever reason, their own gender may be confronted by the fact that they are confronted by somebody else who's transgender. So, and transitioned into another gender. So what does all of this mean? Well, the places that you go to look up this stuff is usually in the right wing. So one of the best places that I've found to look to see what the right wing are thinking is through The Spectator, which I haven't subscribed to, but I snap on every now and again just to see whether I can get through to the article that I required. So in this particular article, it is entitled "Protecting Children Takes Courage." So the argument is that we need to protect children. Now, hold on, I'm the first person on this planet who will agree that that is something that we need to do. But under what guise do we protect children? Do we protect children under the guise that they're being abused by others, which means then certainly we need to protect them? Or do we protect children because children are being forced to make decisions about their bodies that they shouldn't be making? Or are we protecting children simply because they're choosing to do something we don't agree with? Now, it's the latter, I think. And so in this particular article, which is titled, Protecting Children, the announcement, so watch where this comes from, because this is quite interesting. The announcement of the Labor government proposed misinformation bill, while alarming is not surprising. Anyone paying attention in recent years, especially the last 3, will have noticed that our freedom of speech has already been significantly curtailed through online censorship, government censorship, thank you, Department of Home Affairs, and self-censorship. Nowhere has this been more palpable or alarming than the censorship of freedom of inquiry in science and medicine. So this is kind of where they start their article. And then it talks about Gillian Spencer and what she's encountered. And this is where Gillian Spencer loses me. And so, number one, I want you to know, I don't like psychiatry. That psychiatrists hold themselves up as godlike creatures who know all that there is to know, and the rest of us minions simply need to get on with it, take whatever medication they offer, and forget about life in general, because the psychiatrists will look after us. Well, they won't, but nevertheless. So this is what she says about her discipline. And I find this interesting given that psychiatry is pretty dark, really. Previously, our discipline always took a developmental approach, which means that the years of childhood and adolescence were understood to be a period of incredible growth and change. We didn't label children with long-term conditions such as personality disorders because we knew that a lot of conditions would ease with maturity, and indeed the 11 studies that were conducted before the affirmation model was in use, when they used a watchful waiting approach, found that 60 to 90% of children with gender dysphoria became comfortable in their own bodies with maturity. Now, I'm not 100% sure whether that is actually true, but what I am going to challenge is this notion that, understood that the period of incredible growth, we didn't label children with long-term conditions. Well, Jim, who was it that decided that attention hyperactivity disorder was predominant among children? And that why is it that large portions of our population are compelled to take Ritalin and other drugs in order to help them deal with that? Well, because, frankly, you're under the control of the pharmaceutical companies, and therefore it is okay therefore for you to prescribe medication for kids. So when you talk about this knowledge that you've got about children, then I would say it's suspect, frankly, and you're not representing your profession accurately when you make that statement. So immediately she falls out of favour with me, not that she would really care, but nevertheless, that is what has happened. She's chosen to align herself with a version of psychiatry which in practice does not happen. So she goes on to say, I assure you that this is not part of a culture war. This is really serious child protection issue. So by making a child protection issue, it gives it a sense of justification, I guess. And that's something that we will all prick our ears up at, because, you know, child protection is a key issue and that concerns most of us. We're in our field to try to assist children to thrive, but the gender clinics have been set up and psychiatrists are being forced to affirm the social transition of our children and go along with the idea that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones will lead to benefit. And maybe they will. And there are many examples where I think that has happened, that these kids have moved into transitioning, and it's been successful. And there will be those kids that move into that, and as adults will come to a completely different realisation and have to deal with that when it happens, I think. So I guess the bottom line is that much of this stuff is controversial and much of it is a conflict. It also goes on to say, so this was also on the ABC, and it goes on to say here, this is under controversial research pulls Westmead Children's Hospital in the centre of fight over gender care. It goes on to say, transgender health expert Sam Winter, who works at the School of Population Health of Curtin University, argues this model of care is now under existential threat. It's getting rather nasty. So as both sides start to fight this, we find that the war between people like Gillian and others becomes a wee bit gross. Anna resigned late last year after working for 6 months as a clinical psychologist at the Westmead Gender Clinic. She says she didn't feel supported by hospital hierarchy to provide gender-affirming care. So this is the other side of the argument. So we've got Gillian, who has been kicked out because she was too radical and she disagreed with gender-affirming care, and then we've got other people who are simply resigning simply because they're finding it too difficult to work within the hospital because they're not doing enough around gender-affirming care. The Gender Clinic's core team was incredibly gender-affirming and supportive, but it felt like everyone else was doing the bare minimum, so people weren't supporting them. I felt that the environment was very difficult. I think one of the main issues was the long waiting list and the lack of staff, and they've received something like $1.5 million to provide gender-affirming care, and the question was, what were people getting for that? And there were waiting lists at some clinics of around 600 kids. So where does this all sit us? Well, I think we need to start to evaluate whether or not children should at least have the opportunity to talk about the issues that are concerning them in relation to their gender. We should not shut them down, and we certainly should listen to them. What that care should look like in terms of hormone blockers and whatever is another issue. I don't know. I haven't got the medical background, so I don't know or understand any of that. But what I do know is that some of these kids are distressed by the bodies in which they find themselves. And we need to find a way to help them to manage that differently. And perhaps one of those ways is by transitioning. And does this mean we say no to everybody because this is what the right wing wants? Or should we be more understanding and find some sort of middle road and accept that there are some kids who will need to go through that transition and that they need to be supported as best as they can? And under the right sort of treatment, I would imagine that kids would eventually make up their own minds too as to whether this is something they should do. And it's also worth noting that for parents whose kids are going through this stage, it is an extremely troubling time because they, that is the parents, will be watching their children suffer and not knowing what to do about it unless there is some form of treatment method. So somehow we need to get our head around all of this. We need to stop blaming one side over the other, and we need to find a solution for these children, one that perhaps we may not always agree on, but which at least provides benefit to the kids and relieves them of the stress, the anxiety that they're experiencing. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Can I just remind everybody to please subscribe to my channel and let me know what you think, and I will certainly get back to you. Okay, that's it. Thanks everybody. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.